Roya Hakakian, Matt Kaminsky, and I are going to look at the ceasefire. On again, off again, what's going on? What is going on? What's up with the ceasefire? Is it happening? Okay, it's happening. It's been extended, but Strait of Hormuz, it's not even open. Apparently it is open, depending on who you ask. What's going on? Roya, Matt?
Damned if I know.
I am completely puzzled by the notion of an indefinite ceasefire. I thought I understood
You're right.
what ceasefires were all about, but the idea of it being indefinite has me entirely puzzled.
I just think it's another example of the danger of improvisational foreign policy. This applies to all parties in this conflict, and the danger of signaling what you are doing before you are doing it, which seems to take away your leverage. If, let's say, if you're the U.S. I know that from the point of view of the Israelis, this is deeply frustrating because they would want to continue to hit in both Lebanon and in Iraq. The Gulf states too, they want the attacks to end on them, but they also don't want to leave an empowered Iran. I guess if you're stepping back, and I think there's a danger too for us as media people of doing war commentary that feels like sports commentary. I just remember in November of 2001, Johnny Apple, famously the New York Times, declared the U.S. attack on the Taliban a failure a week before Kabul fell because it seemed to be they're bogged down. I think the headlines was echoes of Vietnam. So I think here it's important to step back and see where we really are. Iran is weakened severely. Its military potential is severely weakened. We have destroyed their infrastructure of the nuclear program, which can be seen as a win, but it's not over.
But that's not, Iran never wanted to win-win. Iran always knew that compared to the United States and Israel in facing these two great powers, it was not going to win, but it was going to outlast. And what it is proving is that it's outlasting. And the notion of an indefinite ceasefire means that, you know, we might as well call it quits, because what other gift could they possibly get better than something that has been entirely postponed?
Survival is the name of the game for them. And it's also interesting because it's a ceasefire in the name of what? Coming to the table, but there's no sign that they're coming to the table. You know, we had this on again, off again of, is the vice president going to board a plane or not? You know, you had these very strange situations where people in Islamabad were literally watching, you know, plane spotting to see, is there a plane landing from Tehran with the Iranian delegation? There's no sign that they're talking, but at the same time, you know, minute by minute, it changes. We have boarding of ships. Each side is boarding ships. We have just, you know, shortly before this, we're recording this, U.S. President Donald Trump said that they're going to shoot any boats that are attempting to lay mines in the Strait of Hormuz. So for a ceasefire, it's a pretty volatile situation. If you're boarding ships, there's no sign that there's talking happening, then is it even a ceasefire?
I think that the way that this is playing out is certainly short-term to the IRGC's advantage. But the U.S. needs to figure out what its long game is.
Describe how so, because as far as I'm concerned, if we are still keeping the Gulf blocked, the Strait of Hormuz blocked, there is great pressure on IRGC because they are unable to ship out any oil, and that means that their storages are going to run out. So exactly what do you mean when you say it's a great pressure on IRGC?
Well, I'm actually trying to echo you. I don't necessarily believe this, but I was trying to say that that if you're the Iranian regime, whatever the Iranian regime is right now, it seems to be a three-headed or a nine-headed monster, younger, more radical than what we had before. They have survived this initial punch from Israel and U.S. far stronger forces. They have, like Vladimir Putin in Russia, they've been able to repress even much more effectively and sort of any threat to the regime that existed in January and throughout the life, especially the recent life of the Islamic Republic.
Right.
So they're holding on, and they have cards to use a Trumpism by now. They have the
There are many
cards
cards.
because yes, they're being blockaded, but the U.S. is blockading the Strait of Hormuz,
Right.
and you're going to probably end up with some kind of deal that might resemble, in some sense, what the Obama. That's the case that I don't necessarily agree. The JCPOA.
Right.
I think what the U.S., it would seem, needs to probably articulate or have in mind what is the American long game. It's clear what the Iranian long game is: regime survival. That's it. Long game for any hard authoritarian regime is how do we stay alive and not end up like Muammar Gaddafi in a ditch.
Yeah.
Which is also what they do. I mean, this is the fascinating thing to me, is that they've been in power for 47 years and they managed to always prolong. They buy time. You know, they managed to survive the 8-year Iran-Iraq war. Or most recently, the 12-day war. And apparently they've been regrouping since that 12-day war ended. This is what they do. They always find a way to slump along and survive and live to fight another day. And nobody can deal the death blow, it seems. You know, sanctions have been tried. Everything's been tried and nothing seems to do it. Before we go to the point of what's the U.S.'s game, but what's
the invocation of the Iran-Iraq war by the Iranians, and as people have written, the key figures were formed during the Iran-Iraq war, and that's the experience they're going back to. We survived the onslaught from Saddam. That, in fact, sort of created the kind of the hard man core of the current Iranian elite. And the danger for the U.S. is that we are kind of recreating that experience, and we're going to be recreating that establishment. The counter, it seems to me, to that is for the U.S. to say, okay, when we started this on February 27th, we said we're going to, and I'm interpreting this because this was not said clearly, we're going to try and hit the regime and see how much it wobbles. We're going to try and neutralize their military and their nuclear program. And then the key thing is the day after this ends is to give space potentially to the Iranian people to sort of possibly rise up and change the regime.
I agree.
Yep.
There are several very important points. One is that, you refer to the three-headed or several-headed monster. I think that that's the image that a lot of experts are giving to the rest of us, that somehow there was a, lesser-headed monster, it just had one or two heads and now it's worse than what it was. I think the reality is that these are the people who were really always the power brokers in Iran. They just had, from time to time, they felt the necessity to put up a better disguise or front in order to appease, whether their domestic audiences or international audiences. But the power brokers haven't changed. We're meeting the same cast, this IRGC, and it's now a maimed supreme leader who has allowed the IRGC to call the shots. So I think
they don't even need to dress it up anymore. That's the thing. I mean, you're right.
To feed into
they just do what
the ongoing myth that something has really changed and we've gotten rid of the more pragmatist Iranians or more moderate Iranians. That's number one.
Yeah.
And number two is that I think one of the disadvantages that the United States had was to be under this illusion that somehow if they just clink, if they just deliver a small blow, then Iran will blow up because obviously, Iran had gone through its greatest demonstrations and protests in January, and somehow under the bombs, people would take to the streets and overthrow the regime. That was a terrible illusion. I can't imagine where else in the history of the universe we have seen a nation take over and overthrow a very savage regime that had massacred its people and was now going through a war and bombs were falling. So that was the other disadvantage.
Second thing for sure. The first thing, and this will be in the show notes, Anders's piece today did lay out this kind of cast of characters in great detail. But it does seem to me that replacing the elderly Khamenei for the young Mujtaba is a downgrade if you're looking for a more hardcore leader. That at least the sort of the narrative has been that that elderly Khamenei did keep in mind the larger things and did keep the IRGC crazies in check. Laranjani is gone. He was seen as being a
Pragmatist.
more pragmatic, and then you've completely kind of marginalized the old Rafsanjani crowd, that they cared more about their billions in end business.
But they
and didn't
weren't
care
in
about
play
God.
anyway. They we saw Rafsanjani's daughter from time to time make some noise. She got arrested from time to time. But all in all, they were not the real power holders in Iran. So anyway, I think people are making too much of this thing that
Anders,
something
do you agree? I'm
drastic-
kind of curious. Anders is the one again who's piecing the show notes. You'll see is you kind of laid it out there, this sort of new cast of characters. Do you think this is sort of more of the same, or do you think this is actually more and worse?
I think it's more and worse. I think that because they've taken away the veil of kind of some sort of ideology. Basically, it's just raw brute power now. I mean, there's it's just IRGC, other people scrambling to have some influence. But yes, in the newsletter that came out today, the MBN Iran Thursday newsletter, I talk about the fact that part of what's okay, Mustafa's not there. The importance of the supreme leader. Iran has only had two until Mustafa, and they exerted huge authority. Okay, fine, Ayatollah Khomeini, I mean, he was pretty much the figure from the Iranian Revolution and turned it into an Islamic republic. He had a certain level of authority. Mustafa's father, Ali Khamenei, didn't quite have the clerical authority that you would have expected the successor to Khomeini to have. But he managed to build up his power by enabling all these other forces. And those are the forces that now run supreme. But at least there was the kind of the veil of a supreme leader that they could do their nefarious deeds behind. And now that's gone. And, I mean, just these written statements from Mustafa that are allegedly.
Well, we don't
from
even know if he's
Mustafa.
alive, right?
It's a very
I guess
strange way to.
yeah. Do you think who's actually running the country? Do you think,
Of
Roya? I'll turn to Roya. Yeah.
IRGC, and apparently Mustafa's face has been burned, so he
Is that what it
is
is? Okay.
unable to
Yes.
speak properly and all that, and this isn't how he wishes to appear, especially for the first time. So he has delegated all responsibilities to IRGC, or rumor has it.
Yep.
So the president, foreign minister, speaker of parliament,
Nobody.
these are
They-
nobody is okay.
But here's my point.
Yeah.
They never were anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, when at the most critical points throughout the last 47 years, whenever there has been a very critical moment when a very important decision has had to be made, it's been the IRGC or the supreme leader who made those decisions. It was never the president. In fact, what these crises have always revealed is how incompetent, or impotent, I should say, the president of Iran has always been. It's not a position that's endowed with power.
Yeah.
But let's go back to the ceasefire, because
Yeah.
I think I think the administration deserves one, aside from its improvisational decision making, it deserves one credit, which is that if they can manage to keep the blockade on for a few more weeks, then the IRGC is in serious trouble, because if they're not able to ship out oil and they're not able to actually store them, then what are they going to do with all the oil? And that seems to be the problem that's staring them down in the face. So I don't think the ceasefire
How
really...
much do they care, though? How much do they care if the people suffer? Not very much.
But they suffer too, because they can't pay their
themselves.
own lackeys, how do they survive?
Right.
So it's funny you should mention paying themselves, and earlier you mentioned Rafsanjani, because yes, we look at Iran not just as Iran, but its role in the world. Where does its oil go? Who does it sell it to? But another topic we're going to talk about today is Iranians abroad, and specifically the children, spouses, other relatives, cohorts, if you will, of the Iranian elite. And that's been in the news because they've been doing this for years. It could be business interests, they could be studying, maybe in air quotes, maybe not, buying up property. So, Roya, you want to tell us about that? It seems to have been in the news lately.
Well, let's, as Matt said a little earlier, let's pull back and look at this as a broader picture. Because in a broader picture, what you discover is that the idea that these relatives of regimes, senior officials have been able to be building these lavish lives in Canada, United States, and throughout Europe is in part one of the major sources of discontent inside Iran.
Yeah.
Because through social media, all this information has been revealed, and people are seeing that they are getting beaten up. Women in Iran are getting beaten up on the street for bad hijab or bad, dress code, whereas their own daughters and relatives are gallivanting about the streets of Beverly Hills and Los Angeles in miniskirts.
Yeah.
And I think this, the broader picture here is that, this regime would have done a lot better had social media not existed. But the existence of social media has allowed all this information to trickle in and create a source, a serious source of anger inside the country.
Yeah, hypocrisy is the ultimate Achilles heel for
authoritarians.
For authoritarians, for any regime.
And the cynicism. You're so right. I mean, people are being asked to suffer. One of the things when you walk around Iran, you see these boxes with, they're taking collections for people who suffered, the wounded in the Iran-Iraq war and so on. And there's a national kind of narrative of, if you will, victimhood and suffering and, you name it, it goes very deep. And then you have these people taking advantage of it. This cynicism, it really is stunning. We've seen these videos, the ones that Roya mentioned, of, these mini-skirted children of the enforcers who are making women cover up. Like, how cynical is that? And
but Iran's apparently one of the most secular societies now in the
Yes.
Muslim world.
Thanks to 47 years of theocracy.
Yeah. So it's not, and apparently it's a place where you so rarely hear the call to prayer. And I've not been in the last
and a lot of
decades, but
mosques are in a state of disrepair because they're not being frequented.
So the backlash is not necessarily to the sort of showing off a secular style. It is the corruption, it's the hypocrisy and the cynicism, and ultimately, I think this is a different example, but Viktor Orban in Hungary was brought down, I think, primarily because of this corruption. Fed up, and people just will hear about it, they'll know about it, they'll have friends who have friends, they'll see it on social media. I guess the question I would have is for you, Roya, and for Andres is, if the elite starts feeling the pain, if their kid who goes to USC somebody gets thrown out of the U.S. or is shamed at Harrods in London with like 10 shopping bags. Is that something which is a pressure point on the IRGC, or is this IRGC vanguard? Are they more pure than some of the other establishment figures who more dip into the public purse and also have accumulated so much wealth overseas?
Well, if they're pure,
they're not. I mean, Qasem Soleimani's family was there partying in Miami, and we have, Mushtaba's alleged property in London. I think, whenever I talk to Iranians, I mean, the level of cynicism about it reminds me of talking to people about, during the Soviet period, or anybody who's living under a communist regime, which purported to be about the working class and so on, and everybody knew how cynical it was, that they had their own lanes to drive in traffic and their own shops to shop in, and also their own Western lifestyle. It's a good question. Could the Iranian people feel any more alienated and cynical about the antics of their leadership?
Yeah, but we know that. But we know that the Iranian regime is very unpopular. But my question is more: can putting the pain on the elite through their families, obviously blocking off access to money, that didn't quite work with Putin in Russia. Could it work in Iran?
We have to wait and see. But I'm not sure. Some of it has been painful, not just because the kids are unhappy to be deported to Iran, but also because the kids are on the side of protesters.
Oh,
I was involved in
Yeah.
a documentary several years ago, long four-part series about the hostage taking in Iran in 1979, and our unit had gone and done interviews with the former hostage takers in Iran, and their kids in the next room where they were being interviewed were saying, "My parents were stupid to do what they had done." So some of it is that these kids are not just going to be dissatisfied because they don't have access to their fancy schools in the West, but also that they really have a great, they share in the disillusionment that Iranians have in the regime. But I think there's something that's really worth pointing to. And again, I think that goes back to so much of bad information that keeps circulating, especially in Washington. And it's that everybody, I have seen many times, on respectable broadcast networks, on the day that Khamenei had died, they show people in Iran pouring to the streets, celebrating and dancing. And then they show a demonstration of a group of people who are beating their chests because the leader is gone. And they say, well, there are these people, and then there are those people. And I think what's really
Yep.
important to say is that people have lost faith in the regime and its ideology, or a sense of purity, or divine mission that they had in it, say, throughout the 80s. It was very easy for the regime to recruit soldiers to go fight in the war against Iraq. It's not easy for the regime to do anything similar to that right now. So what I'm trying to say is that what we are witnessing is a loss of ideological belief, and even by their own elites within their own system, and we're
Right.
meeting the corruption, and what really confuses us is the turbans and the robes, because they still have kept the disguise.
Right. But that's been the case
Roy,
for
so I have a-
decades, though, right?
here's
Yeah.
my question is that, famously, when Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union in 1941, there was a lot of dissatisfaction inside the Soviet Union about the ideology of communism. It had basically been in place for almost a quarter of a century. It had clearly failed in many ways. Stalin had managed to really brutally put down various populations in the 1930s. And the Soviet regime cleverly, it now seems obvious in retrospect, but they turned to this defense of Mother Russia. You saw, in their case, religious sort of iconography, literally, being used, but basically patriotism and defense of the motherland against this terrible external aggressor being used to rally people. So I think a key question, and one that I hear a lot from people, is, okay, people don't like the regime, to put it mildly. They're cynical, they're fed up, but are they going to rally? Is the regime going to successfully rally the people because, well, now, Iran, thousands of years old, our civilization was attacked, if you will, by the US president, that now we're all going to come to the defense of our motherland, Iran. Do you think that that's a possibility?
It is not. People are not going to band with the regime because they think that, on balance between an American attack and the regime, they're going to choose the regime against America. No. But something important has happened, which is that after the brutal massacre that took place in Iran in January, and since the regime hasn't fallen nearly 50 days after the severe bombing by two greatest militaries in the world, the feeling that's sinking inside Iran is that they are irremovable, that we're facing a regime that just simply cannot be toppled. We couldn't do it through peaceful means, and Americans and Israelis couldn't do it with bombings. So let's find ways of reconciling and figuring out how to live with them. Interestingly enough, there was one of my favorite New York Times broadcasts is The Daily. And a couple of days ago, this is what The Daily had on. They were interviewing some Iranians, and they were saying, it's now clear to us that nobody can make this regime go away. And that's terrifying, not just domestically, but also for the region, right? I mean, all the Gulf countries and everybody else who has to figure out how to live with this, savage regime next door.
And if that is sort of calcifies as the sort of as the impression, then it can be its own self-fulfilling prophecy.
Defense,
You can get the Chinese sort of back supporting them, that they're inevitable. I will.
Well, if they come through, Russia and China will be endorsing and supporting them even more.
I don't want to overdo parallels, but I just remember covering the fall of Slobodan Milosevic.
Please overdo parallels.
Okay,
I love hearing them.
So a year before, NATO bombed Serbia to get them out of Kosovo, and there's a feeling, this has unified the Serbs against the West, and behind Milosevic, he was out of there within a year. And not the next day, but within 12 months. I'm not saying the same can happen here, but
it was always my hope.
Yeah.
That there would be a bombing similar to what NATO did in 1990 in Yugoslavia, and then a year later people would rally.
Yeah.
But the problem is that this regime has accounted for all of those past failures. They have been very closely studying, the fall of the Soviets and the fall of Milosevic.
The great surprise, I think there's two surprises. One, that there's not much planning done around what's going to happen if the Strait of Hormuz is closed. We could have mobilized, the strategic reserves in the U.S. and elsewhere ahead of time. The second surprise is I remember being in the Gulf just before the bombing, and then I was like, well, surely the Mossad and the CIA are talking to people there and have identified people who are going to step in and they will make deals with, or they can be the ones who could lead some sort of not regime fall, but regime transformation. That was the best thing you're going to hope for, was too much to say regime change immediately, but regime transformation away from Russia and China, more toward us. Let's be pragmatic together. And that just seems that there was apparently either
they miscalculated.
The plans they had were not it didn't really pan out so far,
right?
Or they didn't have any plans, which is even more worrying. There was kind of a hope that Bibi Netanyahu had, and Donald Trump, who I'll say he followed.
But let me jump in with this, which is, stepping back for a moment, they may not be good at their internal propaganda. They clearly have not convinced their population that they're great people. But they seem to be really good, whether it sticks or not, that's a different question. But they have some pretty highly developed video and meme production out there that is sweeping the world. You see it posted on Iranian embassy Twitter X accounts. Does it work? Does it not? Is it hitting home? Is it affecting global opinion? Is it hitting with Generation Z? What do you think?
It's not hitting home in the sense that people are not watching these videos throughout the world and saying, oh, the regime in Tehran is really great. I'm going to move and go live in Iran. It's not hitting that way. But what it is doing very successfully is to fan the flames of discontent and anti-American feelings everywhere in the world. That's what their purpose is. And in that, they're very, very successful, both among the left and among the ultra-right, which is why some MAGA accounts are distributing their videos.
So I think what Roya just said makes perfect sense. It's really about giving ammunition to people who are against Trump, against the U.S., both on the left and the right, domestically in the U.S., obviously in Europe and other places. It's also not a scoop that Persians are clever, and it turns out there's a lot of talented people in Iran. But what strikes me about both these videos, and compare it to some of the memes that have been produced in the U.S. about the war, who are actually against Trump, there's no joy in them. There's not a sense of humor. They feel kind of government produced as opposed to produced by, that come out of a genuine sense of patriotism. I mean, don't want over to the parallels, but if you look at the meme videos that the Ukrainians produced at the beginning of the Russian attack, full-on attack in 2020, most famously the one where on Snake Island in the Black Sea, the operators there was a Russian warship saying, please give up. Please surrender. No, not please. Surrender now. And they said, Russian warship, go yourself. And that became like this kind of call sign across the world, like, Russian warship, go yourself. And the Ukrainian ones, again, they're musical, but they're kind of clever but genuine. And these don't seem very genuine to me.
The American ones.
The Iranian ones. The American ones are kind of funny. There's a great one done by AI where they do this movie, and I forgot who plays Trump and who plays Mushtaba, but it's really quite funny. I think our TV shows have done much better memes than the officially sanctioned Iranian ones.
Right.
You're right. Actually, it's a really good point, Matt. I think Ukrainians that I know were proud and circulated the ones because they felt, they were attacked, right, again by Russia, and they took great pride because they were very clever. And yeah, I don't know Iranians themselves who are circulating these, because I don't think it's hitting home with their domestic audience. I don't think people are sitting, there may be people going, that's really clever, use of Lego, etc. But I don't think it's rallying people in the same sort of patriotic way.
The regime isn't, whoever is producing them, and the regime is certainly funding them, wasn't counting on these to attract the domestic population. This was completely made, and they are being made for foreign audiences, American, European foreign audiences, and Arab, Middle Eastern audiences. Because what it's doing, in the earlier series of Lego films, there were images, or there were animated figures of Imam Ali, the first Shiite Imam, who, in that same religious garb where Ali has always been painted, shows up on a horse with a sword, going after the Americans. So they are not being made for Iranians, but they are meant to inflame the feelings of people throughout the Middle East.
And by the way, this is really nothing new. I mean, the Iranians spend $600 million a year just to reach Arabic language audiences.
And Israeli, by the way. They have Hebrew broadcasts.
Exactly.
Too.
So they really invest heavily and disproportionately to the size of their economy.
Welcome to authoritarianism. Yeah. This is what they do.
And this is also straight out of the Putin playbook. So I think this is not Ukrainian-style memes. This is more Putin-style, kind of fairly heavy-handed, but can be very effective disinformation. So you put out videos, you've got all these bots, presumably, all over social media that kind of pump this stuff out. And that
What's the material effect? I mean, here's an interesting question. So what will be different? Is there going to be any actual result anywhere other than people going, hey, yeah, I get it, that was funny-ish? Do you see that?
No, but that's actually...
It's fanning the flames of anti-Americanism, and it's fanning the flames of anti-Israel, bombings and intervention in the Middle East. I think in that way they're very effective.
But it adds to the noise. It sort of kind of pollutes the sort of information environment. It's like that kind of ambient noise in the casino. It kind of, I think, sort of has the effect of slightly disorienting people and their ability to kind of just see really what's going on. That way it is very effective.
And the polls support that idea, that it isn't that... when you look at how these Lego movies or other Iranian propaganda is affecting populations throughout the Middle East, it isn't that people are changing their minds about the Iranian regime. No, they still think that the Iranian regime is bad and it stinks. But they do think that the United States and Israel are out of line, and they are being two imperialist powers oppressing the, oppressed nations in the region. And that is their purpose. And then, when they fall within the realm of MAGA, it becomes a criticisms of criticism of American foreign policy.
And it also is amplified by the Chinese, amplified by the Russians, picked up by other outlets. The Turks have a very effective information operation as well that we don't talk about very often. So
it bears mentioning that the overwhelming majority of pro-Gaza, pro-Palestinian social media campaign that went on after October 7 was made by the Chinese. So the investments in these misinformation and what we call propaganda, but it's more than propaganda campaigns, is being made by the world authoritarian consortium, not just Iran.
That's the other battlefield, and it's as important. And then they know our domestic politics as well as anyone. And they've also have now a lot of experience in trying to manipulate opinions and the conversation here.
Right. So, way back, since you were mentioning the communists, the great communist motto was workers of the world unite. Now all the democracies are falling apart and disuniting, NATO and EU and others. And then the authoritarians of the world are uniting and they're supporting each other both in every possible campaign, and this is one.
Yeah.
And on that note, we're going to do a wrap on another week of the MBN Iran podcast. You can catch us on the YouTube channel of MBN. You can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Al-Hurra website. And there are going to be show notes, so you can click on them and see, in case you were listening on audio, you can see the things that you missed, the videos. We have newsletters twice a week, Monday and Thursday. We have an Iran newsletter. We have an MBN general newsletter on Tuesdays and Fridays. And I want to thank my podcast partners today, Roya Hakakian and Matt Kaminsky, and tune in next week.